Welcome and thanks for joining us. We'll be getting started in just a few minutes. Thank you to everyone who's joining us. It looks like we're ready to get started, so I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share and kick it over to Kristen to get us started.
Hello, everyone. Wow, what an incredible day so far of speakers. I hope you all are enjoying this National Forum. Just a quick reminder that we would like you to explore Whova. Look at the community tab in particular in the app, and you can connect to others and contribute your ideas. So our next set of speakers will close out today, and then we'll kick off again tomorrow. Our next speaker first is Laurel Patterson, and she is the head of the SDG integration team at the UN Development Program. Her full bio is in your agenda, and I really encourage everyone to go to Whova and click on all of the speakers' bios so you can get more information on their background. But one thing I wanted to call out for Laurel is that she's worked at the UN for nearly 19 years, both in leadership roles, but she's also been in some pretty amazing places with field-based assignments. She's been in Somalia, Zimbabwe, Angola, just to name a few. So Laurel lives and breathes the SDGs, our theme here today at the National Forum. And she's been working on some really interesting new research on the interaction among the goals. So I'm really honored to have Laurel here with us today. Laurel, I'd like to welcome you to the virtual stage.
Kristen, thank you so much. And hi, everyone. I can't see any of you. This is our life in COVID, but it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you. And I do live and breathe the SDGs, as I hope many of you do, and I'll tell you why. Because I think it's one of the most powerful tools that we have to emerge better from the crisis that we're facing now. And if we look back to 2015, when the 2030 agenda was established. This was groundbreaking. This remains groundbreaking. One of the things that's so special about the 2030 agenda and the SDGs is that this is a systems approach to the complexity of human development. There's not any one or the other goals that's more important than the other, or that can be achieved without the other. And I think, you know, for the work that I've been doing on SDG integration, this was known before COVID, but one of the things that COVID has made really clear is just how interconnected everything is. Everything is connected to everything else. If I move just a little bit to the right, you'll see the robot in the background, because there's no way of separating our home, our personal and our professional lives. And maybe there never was, but it certainly is more clear now to all of us. So what I wanted to tell you about is the work that we're doing to ensure that the SDGs remain front and center in the decade ahead. And certainly that is a priority, not only for UNDP, but for the UN system. This is the way that we can emerge from COVID better. So how do we do that? Well, how do we understand first the impact that COVID could have on human development in the decade ahead? And Kristen has shared with you a little bit about a publication we just launched last week on COVID impact on the SDGs. I think what's a little bit different about this study from others is that we are projecting impact to 2030 and to 2050. And this is a study we've undertaken with our partners at University of Denver Party Center. And what we do is we create a series of scenarios to try to understand the impact of various choices, various circumstances that we might find ourselves in, and how those interact with each other. So what's really amazing about the work that Party Center does and their tool International Futures is the system of systems. So it's not only looking at any one or the other impacts or changes, it's on the interrelationships and the potential cascade effects of certain choices on others. So the headline from last week, and you can look at some of this yourself, is that by 2030, we could see the total number of people living in poverty, living in extreme poverty, pushed to more than 1 billion. And 250 million of those people would be in poverty explicitly as a result of the COVID pandemic. 10 years later, 251 million additional people to those already in poverty now could be facing those circumstances as a result of the COVID pandemic. And this has to, again, underline to us just how interconnected the world is, and just the way in which these systemic inequalities and these other major challenges that we're facing in terms of the climate crisis impact each other, and the way that they can do that continuously over time. One of the things that you can do with any of the scenarios that we've developed is you can go to our data insights platform and you can model this for any country. All of this is based on historical data, so you can get a sense of what that means in one country versus another. What wouldn't surprise you is that in a worst case scenario, of course, those that are already in fragile and conflict affected settings are even worse off. But it's quite an even split, actually, this additional 250 million people that could be in poverty, in terms of those that are both in what we would call multidimensionally fragile settings, and those that are not currently in those settings. And that also has to ask us a set of questions around global solidarity and how we support each other going forward. If increasingly countries that have the ability to support others are focused on their own domestic situation, what would that mean? What could the potential implications of that be in the future? Now, not to leave you with bad news, and it's really not the point of what I wanted to share with you today, we created a scenario that we called the SDG push. We worked with policy experts across UNDP, and we said, what would it take not only to recover better, what would it take to flourish? What would it take to create that vision of the future that's green, that's resilient, that's fair? And we looked at 48 different parameters and we modeled them. And again, you can find all of the details of this on the Data Insights platform, and I'll be sure to put the links in here as well too. They're also on Whova. And what I would draw your attention to is that in that scenario, which takes into account the COVID impact that we see today, in that scenario, you could expect 146 million people to be lifted out of poverty. And you could expect that by 2030, and you can see what that would look like by 2050 as well too. And there's nothing in that that's wildly ambitious or unfeasible. All of those parameters that we've modeled are based on achievements that countries have already made in different contexts and settings. And again, the power is connecting them together. And some of the main areas that we've modeled in that SDG push scenario are around investments or interventions. I call them investments, but I don't only mean financial. And I'll speak a little bit more to that in a minute. I've investments in social protection, particularly in social protection floors like education and health, investments in government, in inclusive democracy, especially in anti-corruption, investments in digital and connectivity and the infrastructure that's required therein, and investments in a transition to a green economy. And you can see how that is also modeled and measured therein as well too. What is really important if we were going to reach that vision of the future and make those kinds of choices now is that it's not only about financial investments. There is a definite need for targeted investments. And we're seeing a lot of countries make them now anyway in terms of investments needed in digital infrastructure, for example. It will also take behavior change, and that's all of us in the room. We all know that from the way that we've changed our behavior over the course of the past year in any case. And it's also certainly around improved governance and governance effectiveness too. And we see that combination of governance effectiveness, behavior change, and certain targeted investments that need to come together in order for that scenario of a future to become a reality for us. What will it take to reach that? A couple of things that I think are really important here. One is that we continue to drive multi-stakeholder processes, multi-stakeholder dialogues, a lot like the one that you're having here. And I was really interested to see all of the various groups that have been discussing over the course of today and tomorrow. This needs to continue, and we really need to ensure that we're bringing in different aspects of society, different types of partners across sectors and so on, to start thinking about how we can work and continue to work closely together. The other reflection that I would share is that we need to think in systems, and I had started by saying that the 2030 agenda is in fact a systems agenda. And we need to be real about uncertainty. And so my point in sharing these scenarios is not to say this will definitely happen or that will definitely happen. We know now we have this common sense, heightened probably for most of us for the first time. We don't know what's going to happen next year. We never knew what was going to happen next year. Now we have a much deeper sense of what that means. How do we start to take that reflection and program it into the work that we do? And so one of the things that I would draw your attention to, and I didn't share this link with Kristen, but I will, is the work that one of our partners at MIT Presencing Institute leads. And they lead something called a Gaia Journey. And in that Gaia Journey, it's an impromptu global infrastructure, I would say, to help make sense of the current pandemic, and to do that through dialogues and through a systemic approach to transformational change. And that's also a set of insights that we're also bringing in to the UN system and with our partners globally. The other thing that I would want to end with for this group, and to quote Rebecca Solnit, if you don't follow her, I would suggest that you do, who talks about hope as being as embracing radical uncertainty and radical change, is that we have seen in the past year shifts in policy, shifts in behavior, shifts in investment that would have seemed impossible even a year ago. So we know that it's possible. We contributed to something called the SDG Moment, which is an annual event held at the GA. The first was this year, digital, of course. And we looked, for example, at social protection investments, and we looked at the example of Colombia. Colombia had spent 20 years making investments in reducing multidimensional poverty, and Colombia actually has the fastest reduction in multidimensional poverty in the world. And they built up a social protection network that was covering several million people, and they did that over time. They made investments in digital, they made investments in financial infrastructure. What they did is, in a matter of weeks, they doubled the coverage that they were able to provide to vulnerable people as a result of COVID. They took 20 years and probably a good 10 to build up this social protection registry, and they doubled it in a matter of months. This is possible, and countries are able to do this, again, when they come together across sectors and with a common goal and a common ambition. And that is not going to mean that poverty figures will be reduced in Colombia. No, the projections are certainly that there will be a significant impact of COVID. But the estimate is that as a result of the choices that they made and the investments in social protection, that anticipated rise in poverty will be lower by 5 percentage points than it would have been otherwise. And I think that that's a tremendous reflection on what's possible. My last point before I close, we looked at a number of opinion polls which were conducted early on in the COVID pandemic that was looking at people's vision for a future. And at that point, we heard a lot of people say, I don't want to go back to how things were before. I'm willing to maintain not only the changes, but I'm willing to make further changes. And now we're at a point in the pandemic globally where people are exhausted. And I think we all feel that. And what you get is a waning of that sentiment of what's possible, what I can do, what we can do, all of us here. And you sort of say, I just would rather go back to the office. I would rather get back on the plane, etc. And so I think what's really important for a group like this, all of us collectively, certainly what we're thinking about at the UN, is how can we continue to drive this need for profound change in the choices that we make going forward. So it's a little bit even less about what those changes are, but how. How do we come together? How do we continue to motivate and support each other? How do we continue to use evidence and data to drive the choices that we want to make for the future? But let us really consider, be real about the impact that this has on all of us personally and on our willingness to change or maintain the changes that we've already made and try to build through that. One of the reflections from our administrator at UNDP that I always found really powerful is that when he reflects on when the UN was started, when it was initiated in 1945, this was preceded, and in the visioning and the thinking about establishing a United Nations was in some of the darkest days of World War II. So profound change is not only available to us when times are good, but it really is in moments like this when things seem fairly bleak, pretty impossible, we're tired collectively. This is the moment truly that I think we need to bind together and work in the many ways that many of you are on so many issues related to the SDGs and really help drive forward that collective vision of what's possible. So I want to encourage all of you. Thank you so much for having me. Would love to engage with any of you as you interact with our publication, the study, and anything else that we can do to be useful to the work that you're all doing. So Kristen, thank you so much.
Laurel, thank you so much for your remarks. I wish we could spend the rest of the day with you as well. Thanks for your remarks. Thanks for your fascinating reports, and we'll definitely stay in touch. And as you said, this is not going to be easy, but we must rise to the challenge and continue these conversations. So thank you so much, Laurel. Our next speaker is, I'm really thrilled to have him here with us today, is travel writer Rick Steves. He will be giving introductory remarks before our multimedia session that highlights several documentaries about humanitarian and environmental issues. So many of you know Rick Steves from the successful PBS travel show and his multiple books, but you might not know about his more recent work in documentaries to raise awareness about critical issues of our time. Rick is a storyteller and an activist who believes in the power of film to move people to action. I'm really honored to have Rick with us here today. Rick?
Thank you very much, Kristen, and it's wonderful to be with you and share a few ideas how we can build on the hope that Laurel was just talking about. Our mission, I think, is to be forces for peace and for economic justice. And my mission as a travel writer and a tour guide is, with my staff of 100 people here in Seattle, is to inspire Americans to venture beyond Orlando. To get out there and get to know the world and to learn about our home by leaving it, actually. I find in a lot of ways, you learn more about yourself and your home by leaving your home and looking at it from a distance. So my goal is a teaching mission, and fundamental to that is, how do I amplify what I've got to teach? You could have lots to teach, but if you don't amplify it, you're not getting the traction you really want to get. And my experience is on a tour bus, riding groups around Europe to try to expose them to different ways of thinking and beauties of different cultures. and as a TV producer with public television. I've got a wonderful gig at public television to share my passion, lessons I learned through travel. So I want to just take a few minutes to give you kind of a blitz of a bunch of tips that help me amplify my teaching. And 25 years on a tour bus, I've got the mic in my hand. It's sort of the bully pulpit. I've got a captive audience, and I need to break through, and I need to be careful not to abuse the bully pulpit. I can assume that I have caring people who want to be challenged. My profit in my business, as a matter of fact, is more than just the conventional bottom line. It's how many people's worldviews do I impact? And my profit is based on not preaching to the choir, but teaching and reaching beyond the choir. How do we gain the trust and the respect of people who are not already on board with us? That is so fundamental. And over the decades on my tour buses, I found that if I let people know that, because I've got a progressive outlook on economic justice and so on. If I can let people know I'm a businessman and I would only run my business in the United States, I love to be able to turn on a dime. It's a wonderful environment for a hardworking entrepreneurial capitalist. That gains their trust. If I let them know that I love my country, that I'm patriotic. We go to a castle in France where the family that run that castle have a precious 48-star American flag. It's like a relic. And they bring it out for their American guests. And they say, this is the flag we hoisted over our village when we were freed from Nazi tyranny in 1945, when Americans liberated us from Nazis. Whoa, that just touches people, and it lets people know their guide, their teacher, sees the world like them, and we're friends. We're on the same team. To let people know the world wants a strong America. The world misses leadership right now. The world is thankful that America will be back at the table. To acknowledge that, yeah, Europe is thankful that because of American economic might, we saved them from a future of Soviet dominance or whatever. We won the Cold War. These are ways you can win the trust of your audience. And then not to be scary. It's so important that when we're preaching beyond the choir that we're not scary. Because of my outlook, I firmly believe that when it comes to peace and economic justice, truth has a liberal bias, but my audience doesn't necessarily see it that way. So I got to be careful not to be extreme. If I'm doing a TV show about the Holy Land, it's not pro-Palestine. It's a dual narrative. It's getting voices from both sides of that wall. It's very important to personalize it, to be a little bit self-deprecating. When it comes to my show on Iran, I admitted all I knew about Iran before I traveled there was what I learned from Ted Koppel during the hostage crisis. And that's a pretty pathetic sort of context to base your assessment of current affairs on basically a media circus designed for American television. I like to make a very strong point, but not come with it with a guilt trip that you privileged rich people. You know, my daughter has $5,000 for braces. She gets straight teeth. For the cost of that set of braces, you could drill a well in a thirsty village, you know, in the developing world, and all the moms could stay home and take care of their kids instead of abandoning them and walking for water every day. For the cost of one set of braces, you give a whole community running water. That's not a guilt trip. We have a successful winning system. We work hard. Our kids get straight teeth. But that doesn't neglect the fact that for the cost of that set of braces, you could impact a community like that. And then we've got to remind people that's more than just love your neighbor. That's making the world a safer and a more stable place. That's called soft power. So it's wonderful opportunities to share these messages in a way that doesn't lay a guilt trip on people. I also believe we have to be incremental. I work really hard in drug policy reform, and the most sophisticated thinkers, I think, believe we should legalize all drugs and just have a program of pragmatic harm reduction rather than locking people up. And I agree with that, but I don't think the American public is ready for that. So I'm an incrementalist. I'm sort of a wimp from their point of view. And I just say, let's legalize marijuana first and turn it into a health and an education challenge rather than a criminal issue. So we need to be, you know, in Italy, they say piano, piano, little by little, baby steps. I think that's important if you don't want to be afraid. Also, I bolster my credibility by reminding people that I'm a leader in my church. I'm a family person. I love my American free enterprise system and so on. You know, then you can present some what otherwise might be considered radical ideas. We have to respect media constraints. You know, if you have agenda journalism, you're going to be put into a little corner with Noam Chomsky, and bless his heart. I mean, I love that. But if I was doing a show on Palestine, which I did, it can't be agenda journalism, because then it just gets into that echo chamber. And I don't think I've accomplished what I want to accomplish. I'm in public television. There's gatekeepers there. I do not want my documentary to be labeled an opinion piece. That'd be a huge disadvantage. I want it to be considered balanced. Now I have to make those hard decisions. I know when I write an editorial, if it uses the word Palestine, it will not be printed in the Los Angeles Times. They just simply will not print an editorial that has the word Palestine in it. So you need to call it the West Bank. Do you want to go to the mat on those issues? When I did my show, I called it Palestine instead of the West Bank or what occupied territories or whatever. And I knew that the show would probably not be aired in New York City by the major public television station there. They're just pragmatic and they don't want to offend potential donors, and they're just not going to go there. So we have to understand media constraints. My themes over the years has been to take issues that I think are important, that I can lend a particular angle on from my traveler's perspective, and where I can sort of inspire caring, thoughtful Americans who are steep on the learning curve. We've talked about Iran, we've talked about the Holy Land, we've talked about fascism. My latest show is about hunger. And a lot of these topics are topics that really don't have much in the way of underwriting potential. Most corporations don't want to risk being considered a Jane Fonda mouthpiece of the enemy. That's what I was called when I did my show on Iran. And they're just nervous, so we have to be realistic about that. My latest project has been a TV show called Hunger and Hope. And Lauren was talking about the whole notion of hope. Yes, hope is such an important dimension to this. But, I had a clear goal, and I wanted to make my goal very realistic and very sort of tangible. We wanted to humanize what is extreme poverty. 10% of humanity living on $2 a day or less. And then also the notion that hunger can be beat. This is a realistic goal. It's not pie in the sky. Also, we wanted to make a point that today's development aid is practical. It's a smart, pragmatic investment. And then I wanted to be pragmatic about what motivates Americans. Probably half Americans would embrace this idea of love your neighbor. And probably half Americans in the privacy of the voting booth don't really think about love your neighbor. They think about what's going to make me safer, what's going to make our world more stable. So we summed up our show on Hunger and Hope, Lessons Learned in Ethiopia and Guatemala by saying whether you're motivated by love your neighbor and you want to take the ethical approach, or if just between you and me, you're a little more greedy and selfish and you just want to live in a safe world, it doesn't matter. This is what we can do. It's a practical investment to embrace the notion of modern development aid. So for me, my profit is how many viewers can I impact? How many people are impacted in the tour I lead, the book I write, the TV show I make, and so on. And you've got to have amplification when you're writing something. So when I make a TV show, I get charged for it, but I self-fund it. I don't limit myself by worrying about underwriting. And then I offer it to the network for free. A lot more people run it because it's free. It's also free to stream in many different ways. I break it into teachable bits. So there are small bits, and then I produce sort of an app called Classroom Europe, where teachers can take something just on stunting, or just on climate change, or just on empowering women, or just on the importance of water infrastructure, just on climate smart agriculture, whatever. And they have these little teachable bits, free, fast, easy, without any cluttered by any ads. I want to be other organizations' cash cows. And cash is not money, but cash cows would mean just what is our mission and how can we help drive people to their website or whatever. I produced a book along with the TV show, and the book is really not available for sale. It's a free PDF download on our website, so people can get more information. And with that, at the end, you've got a whole section on how we can make a difference. So these are ways we can get more amplification, more reach. I love to help nonprofits use the book or the DVD as thank you gifts for fundraisers. We're doing that for public television. The TV documentary, for example, would get a second life after it spent itself as a normal special as a pledge drive. And this March, we'll have the Hope and Hunger show coming out again all across the United States as a pledge drive. And that because it's a cash cow for TV stations, it'll get a lot of push. Right now, one of the hottest pledge shows in the United States is my show on fascism. And it's really great for me because I want more people to watch it. When you write a script for a 1-hour show, you get 7,000 words, and you got to be tight. You really got to be tight. And I got to view that script in very simple, direct languages. It's got to have the Joe six-pack test. Is it going to be accessible to Joe six-pack? It's got to pass the so what test. Really, does it add to the value of my mission? It's got to have local voices to give it credibility and a more intimate understanding. When you're talking about empowering women, you want local women to be featured and hear their voice. When you're talking about the value of a health post, you want a local health post worker. When you're talking about the importance of climate change, you want to walk with a farmer through his parched field. So I just want to wrap it up with just a thought here about how we can make sure that people are going to take our message and then take it to heart. In the case of development aid, I wanted to make the point that, yes, a lot of people are cynical and negative about development aid, but that may be the old-fashioned development aid, and acknowledge it made people dependent, whereas today's development aid makes people independent. I want to remind people that it is a practical sort of investment. As a tour guide, my mission is to give people culture shock in a way that it is the growing pains of a broadening perspective, and then help people take home what I think is the most beautiful souvenir, and that is an empathy for the other 96% of humanity. And that lets people go home and walk the talk and live out their faith and become good, active citizens. And when they have that new perspective, that broadened perspective through travel, through my documentary or whatever, then supporting an organization like those that are with us right now becomes more than supporting a charity. To them, it becomes a service. It's a blessing. I love the thought that supporting an NGO is supporting a service. And that makes all of our work, I think, more effective and for all of us to reach our mission. So I hope that gives you some ideas about how to make your mission more accessible and amplify it better. And thank you for all the work you do, and happy travels, even if we're all just staying home for a little while.
Rick, thank you so much for those remarks. It's really insightful and interesting to hear, especially in this documentary, specifically Hunger and Hope. So what we're going to do now is actually you all will have a chance to see the trailer of Hunger and Hope, as well as a multiple of organizations that have posted videos in our multimedia session. This includes also one from Vulcan that we actually have the Oscar-nominated director here that's going to, you can chat with them through the chat function in Whova, as well as others. There's a point person for each of the documentaries that is here to answer your questions. So for those of you in the audience, I really hope that you will go to your agenda and click through. And this will be the ending session for our day today. Tomorrow we will kick off again. We have a full slate of speakers. So when you come back tomorrow, we'll have something very similar in the format. Jump on Whova early, start interacting with each other. Very much want you to look at the community boards there. And these documentaries that are posted here, they'll be available throughout the time that you have Whova. So please click on them today and interact with the point person, and then go back and view the videos throughout this time that you have Whova. So with that, we'll close this session, and Josh will come in and tell you how to get to the agenda as well. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Kristen. Please, everyone, be sure to interact with our SDG multimedia sessions by clicking on the agenda in Whova and selecting the next session. You can watch the videos and interact by choosing the sub-sessions that you're interested in. Thank you all so much for attending.